I don't have much time left. Even now, as I sit here typing this, my hand is placed over my stomach. I can feel something changing, something deep inside of me, twisting and whirring inside, waiting to be let out. You may not believe me, hell, you'll probably think of this as a joke, but it will become apparent very soon that this message is a very true one and is of what is to come. Incident 1. I woke up to my alarm. My room had a hazy feel and was darker than normal. When I looked out the window, all I saw was white, as if snow had covered the glass. Groaning, I sat up, glancing towards my sister in our shared room. But something wasn't right. From a crack in the window, a string of fog led to her head as she muttered in her sleep. I shook her awake. "Wake up," I cried, and as she did, the smoke disappeared. "I'm up, Andy," she groaned, her emerald eyes glowing in the dim light, and her curly blonde hair in a tangled mess. "Come on, Rosie, we'll be late for school," I said. Mom and Dad were sitting at the table, eggs and toast already prepared and waiting for the two of us. They looked forlorn, as if contemplating something. "Is everything all right?" Rosie said, holding onto each word. My mom was staring out the window, her eyes wide. Was she afraid? "There's a thick fog," my dad explained. "Your mom thinks that maybe you should stay home today." Me and Rosie's faces light up with joy. "Let's go," we both screamed, giving one another a high five. My dad shook his head. "Personally, I don't think it's a big deal. Scared of a little fog. They shouldn't miss school over. They can't go outside." My mom said as if the idea of it was ridiculous. Her eyes never left the window. I followed her gaze, trying to peer through the fog, but something wasn't right. The fog was shifting in an unnatural way, coursing as if it were a living being, desperately searching for a way in. Okay, Dad relented. "I guess we'll all stay inside today." Mom let out an exasperated sigh, her shoulders slumped, finally relaxing, but only a little. We all sat around the table eating, me and Rosie already making plans on how to fill the day. "We'd game," I said, "and draw," said Rosie, and annoy Mom I whispered, but Mom's eyes never left the window. "Maybe," Rosie said, leaning in, her eyes full of mischief, "we could even take a look outside." "You will do no such thing," my mom yelled, her temper surprising the both of us. "I swear if you open that door it'll be the end of both of you." "Yes, ma'am," Rosie said, ignoring the threat as she sneaked a wink at me. Our day was filled with fun, running around the house, fighting one another, playing with each other, and annoying our parents. "What a perfect day," Rosie said with an exasperated sigh as if we'd spent the whole day working. "Maybe this fog is a blessing," I said with a chuckle, but my mom did not agree. Her long dark hair slumped over her head as she continued to stare out the window. "What's wrong with Mom?" Rosie asked quietly. "Don't know, maybe she saw something outside." "Something? I heard that fog like this can mean there's a monster nearby," I whispered. "No way, you're just trying to scare me." Rosie punched my arm. "Then let's take a look," I suggested, and we both went to our room so our mom wouldn't see what we were up to and stared out the window. A thick fog covered the glass, making it impossible to see anything outside. "I can't see anything," Rosie complained and took her eyes off the window, already bored. But just as I stared to pry my eyes, for a split second, a part of the fog began to take shape. My eyes squinted trying to be sure of what I saw. Part of the fog began to form into a giant eye with a huge grin beneath it. I jumped back from the window, crying out in surprise, but when I looked back the figure was already gone. Incident 2, I woke up that night to the sound of Rosie's voice, but there was another sound. "Rosie," I whispered unsure. My eyes slowly opened, taking in the darkness, but the room wasn't dark. It had a faint glow coming from the fog through the window. "Strange," I muttered, my mind still half asleep. There was something just outside the window. Slowly, I got up, my feet hitting the cold floor. It was too cold. I looked down and saw a faint mist on the floor. Some of the fog had gotten in, pouring itself through the window and covering the floor as if it was some sort of cool blanket. Each step I took made the fog stir. Rosie's muttering grew more and more erratic. The window. There was something in the window. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, my vision clearing up as I looked out the window. The fog was not as thick as it was in the morning. I could see outside and down our driveway. That was when I saw it. Its hand landed on the floor, peeking out from the corner of our garage as it walked into view. A large hand thumped on the floor, heavy enough that I could feel its vibrations. I followed the hand to a long and strong, gray arm that was covered in boils on a bare chest, with the ribs open like a door, dark tendrils branching out of the ribcage and disappearing only to stretch out again as if grasping for the air. The creature had no legs, and instead ended in a tail-like tendril that floated in the air, making it seem impossibly unbalanced. Its face was lizard-like yet human, and suddenly its mouth shot fully open, impossibly wide, and a loud sound similar to a horn emitted through its gaping void. "Is this a dream?" I stammered, backing away from the mirror. There's a sudden chuckle behind me. My head whipped around to my closet, and my heart began to pound hard enough to burst through my chest. There was a wide, vertical grin stretching the length of my dark closet, stretching as tall as me. Dozens of eyes flowed around the grin with a dark mass as its body. The creature raised a void of a limb, stretching a broken finger to its mouth to shush me. Dozens of voices emanated from the creature, speaking words but impossible to understand. It grabbed onto the doorway of my closet with another impossible to make out limb. As the voices grew louder, another foghorn. My head was spinning, unsure of whether it should whip back to the creature out the window or stay focused on the one in front of me. It chose the latter. Slowly, the creature began to emerge from my closet, pulling its body out with its long arm. Its voices grew faster, more excited. A warm liquid began to stream down my leg. The creature's eyes widened. A long, purple tongue slipped out of its mouth to lick its lips. Another foghorn. My eyes clamped shut, unable to stand the fear. My heart pounding, ready to burst, as tears escaped my eyelids. Suddenly all of the voices grew quiet, and after a minute or two, my eyes slowly opened. But the creature was still there. Its grin opened. "She's coming," it said, all of its voices coming together for one final message before it disappeared into a cloud of smoke. Incident 3. I woke up to an itch covering my leg. The bed soaked in piss. That was a bad dream. It had to be, right? My eyes shot to the closet door, dreading what they might see, but luckily there was nothing there. I glanced around the room, still unsure of what to think when I noticed Rosie's bed was empty. Did she wake up early? "Rosie," I called, searching around the house. There was no answer. "Rosie," I said again, more desperate. That's when I heard her soft voice. "She's coming soon. Okay, she's coming soon. Okay, she's coming soon. Okay." She was sleepwalking again, her hand fondling the bracelet I gave her as a kid, even in her sleep. "Rosie," I screamed, grabbing her arm. "Is she coming?" "Okay." Her rant changed slightly. I tried to shake her awake. I tried calling her name another time, but she would not wake up. She continued to walk, muttering her chant in a trance. Something wasn't right. She walked through the kitchen, heading through the dining room, heading towards the front door. "Rosie," I screamed. Mom always told me not to shake someone awake when they were sleepwalking, as it could make them hurt themselves, but Rosie was nearly at the door, her hand reaching for its lock. That's when I noticed a small strand of fog leading up to her head, coming from underneath the door, guiding her. She clicked the lock. "Is she coming?" "Okay," Rosie said again, reaching for the handle, but I leapt in front of her, smacking the fog away from her head. As the fog cleared up, disrupted by the air, Rosie slowly woke up, nearly falling to her knees. "What was that?" she began. "Who's coming?" I said, ignoring her question. Her eyes began to grow cloudy again, as if she wasn't really present. A god. Incident 4. My mom gave me a mouthful for my wet bed, and after I showered and changed the sheets I could hear my parents arguing. "They won't go outside." "You won't." My mom screamed. "You're overreacting, honey. There's no harm in touching a little fog." My dad kept his temper. "You're wrong." My mom's eyes darted to the window, filling with terror. "There's something wrong with the fog. Something's not right. It's just a little fog." Rosie walked past them, her footsteps strong and determined as she headed right towards the door. Mom was instantly on her feet, running to catch up to Rosie. "Rosie," Mom screamed, but it was already too late. Rosie clicked the lock and opened the door. The door opened with a long creak. Fog instantly flooded into the house like cold air from a freezer. Rosie's eyes were glossy, and her movements were sluggish as if she was sleepwalking again, and I saw a trail of fog leading to her forehead. Mom grabbed Rosie and basically threw her away from the door. The fog flowed over Mom, a faint glow in its mist. "Oh," she muttered, as if she suddenly understood something important. Her body slumped and relaxed, her once wide eyes relaxing and becoming distant. "Honey," Dad asked. The fog continued to pour in, covering her. Her arm twitched, the fog rolled through the doorway enveloping her. "Oh," she said again, this time almost sad. The fog was moving unnaturally. It began to wrap around my mom, encircling her as if she were inside a transparent egg. The fog began to condense, seemingly hardening around my mother. "Oh," she whispered one final time as the fog began to pour into her mouth. I slammed the door shut. Dad was too stunned to speak. What the hell was going on? "Why did you?" I began, turning to look at Rosie, but she was already gone. Incident 5. We ate in silence. Rosie seemed normal but had a weird stare. "We should go back to school soon," Rosie said. I expected my mom to become angry, but no. "True, you can go tomorrow." Their voices had no emotion. They seemed to be talking to no one, as if they both understood one another perfectly. "But what about the fog?" I asked nervously. "A little fog wouldn't hurt anybody." My mom mimicked my dad's words, but not in a mocking way. She was staring straight ahead. She was here but looking somewhere far away. "We can't go outside," Dad finally said sternly. "Not while that fog is here." "We can't stay here forever," Mom said. "We have to go outside." "We can wait. Nobody's going outside until that fog clears." "Weren't you the one who said something isn't right?" "It's just a little fog," she mimicked, and as if on cue, there was a knock on the door. My eyes shot to the door, and so did Dad's. A series of knocks came again, more urgent. "Hello," we could hear our neighbor, Miss Baker, shout. "Is anyone home? Please let me in." "Dad, what do we do?" My voice quivered. "No one is opening that door. We have to let her in," Rosie chimed in, her voice dead yet demanding. "It's just a little fog," Mom said. The knocking grew louder. "Let her in," Rosie commanded. My eyes darted from Mom to Rosie to the window, then finally to the door. "Please let me in," Miss Baker screamed. "My husband." There was something wrong with my husband and he. My dad stood and ran to his room, reappearing seconds later with his rifle. "Dad?" I asked nervously. Mom and Rosie followed him to the door, their eyes blank. "Dead?" Dad only hesitated for a moment before reaching out and opening the door. The fog wasn't as thick as it was before and Ms. Baker burst in, ignoring the rifle in my dad's hand. "Oh goodness," Ms. Baker cried, leaping into my mom's arms. I was so scared. "Why, you wouldn't even believe what I..." She couldn't even speak through her tears. My mom, usually very loving and compassionate, however, did not even hug the woman back. Her hand stayed slumped to her side. "Is something the matter, Roxy?" Ms. Baker asked, confused. "She's tired is all," Dad spoke for her. "Oh," Miss Baker said, slumping onto one of our dining room chairs. We all took our places back at the table. "Help yourself," my dad told Miss Baker, and she began to dig in, telling us about her living nightmare as she stuffed her face. She told us how the first day the fog came in, she too could tell that something wasn't right, but her husband didn't believe her and still went outside to feed their pet chickens that they kept in a coop. "I told him," she said, "I told him to just let those damn chickens starve. Fuck if I care. But he went out anyway, that stupid old man." She took a mouthful of bread before continuing. "When her husband came back, he was acting strange, and when they went to bed that night and she woke up, she wasn't lying next to her husband. It was a creature that wore her husband's clothes. I can't even begin to describe what I saw," Ms. Baker cried. "It was like a wooden plank filled with holes, but still organic, you know. I didn't know, so he was the first," Mom said, and I glanced at her timidly. Rosie was smiling in anticipation. "He what now?" Ms. Baker asked, pausing. "Anyway, I locked that thing in my room, barricaded the door, but I was too scared to go outside, too scared of that damn fog. But when it cleared up a bit, began to feel less menacing, I took the risk and ran straight here." "Well, I'm glad you're safe," Dad said, unsure of what else to say. Miss Baker could sense the tension in the house, but having her around made the house more lively. She could talk for hours and hours, and being stuck in a home with Rosie and Mom acting strangely, that was exactly what we needed. "I didn't even want those damn chickens," Ms. Baker said, but my meathead of a husband went on and on saying it'd save us so much money. She went on and on too. Eventually, it grew dark, and it was time for bed. "You can sleep with Roxy on our bed. I'll take out the air mattress and sleep on the floor," Dad said politely. It was usually Mom who did all the talking for him. I don't think I've ever heard my dad talk so much. Miss Baker gave him a warm smile. "Well, aren't you lovely? If only I had a husband like you, instead of that stupid old man." Miss Baker seemed mean, but there was a sadness in her voice and I could see a tear flow gently down her cheek. "I'm sorry about Randy," my dad said, and her smile faded. "It's okay, maybe he's not even gone. For all I know, that idiot just went outside and got lost in this fog. He'd do something like that too. I wouldn't put it past him." The grown-ups went to their room. "Come on, Rosie," I said, grabbing her hand. Her arm was freezing, but she followed me like a lost child. Eventually, my eyes were able to close and fall asleep, exhausted from all the stress from the day. Incident 6, I woke up to the creak from Rosie's bed. Wiping the tiredness away, I realized it was still pitch black outside. She must have been sleepwalking again. Adrenaline coursed through my body as I feared what she would do. I got to my feet, wincing again at the cold fog that covered the floor, and began to run after her. I rushed past the door and saw Rosie heading through the hallway towards the kitchen, towards the front door. Panic began to spread through my body, and I didn't even realize my mom and Miss Baker at the hallway window until I nearly passed them. My eyes spun towards the two and my heart sunk. My mother was holding a wide-eyed Miss Baker to the open window by her hair. Miss Baker looked frozen, her mouth agape and eyes wild in terror as the fog began to roll out the window and pour through the woman's mouth. My mom had a slight smile on her face, and her long, black hair floated impossibly in the air as if she were underwater. I began to hear the creak of the front door. What should I do? My eyes darted from down the hallway to the two women. A gasping sound was escaping Miss Baker's lips as fog continued to flood her mouth, tears beginning to roll down her face. Fog also gently seeped into my mother's nostrils, and a soft blue glow emanated from her pale skin. I turned and ran towards Rosie. "Rosie," I screamed, and she turned to give me a blank stare, fog gushing into the house with its blue light. I slammed the door shut, making sure to stay away from the fog. Rosie looked disappointed almost as I grabbed her by the wrist, feeling her bracelet on my hand as I dragged her away from the door. I expected to see my mom and Miss Baker still at the window, but the window was closed shut, and the two were nowhere to be seen. I forced Rosie to her bed and told her to stay there as I lay in mine, not wanting to fall asleep, but eventually the fatigue took over and my eyes drifted shut. Incident 7, I woke up to a shrill scream, then another and another. It was my father. Those were his screams. I knew they came from him even though I had never heard him scream before, especially not a blood-curdling scream like this. I jumped out of bed and ran into my parents' room, but nothing could prepare me for the scene that I saw. My dad laid sprawled across the bed, his stomach cut open and guts protruding. He was yelling, tears, sweat, and spit covering his face, yet he was not thrashing about, as if he were paralyzed. My mom sat to his right, looking down on him and patting his head, wiping away his sweat. "Quiet," she said, "you'll scare the children." He lets out another scream. "It's okay," she said, "you're almost there, it's okay." She patted his shoulder. My eyes turned to the left, to the thing that was causing all of my dad's suffering. The thing was a stick bug-like creature, its head long and narrow and neck like the neck of a guitar. Its skin seemed hard, almost wooden, and its body ended in a large lump with two tiny, useless legs on what seemed to be the stomach. It was wearing Miss Baker's clothes. The creature reached down with its twig-like arms that ended in a sharp point. It began to pull and twist at the insides of my dad's stomach until finally dissecting a piece of him and lifting it to its tiny narrow mouth and chewing, holding onto a piece of my dad with its hands like chopsticks before reaching down again and stretching my dad's skin further, dissecting him. My dad continued to scream. There, my mom comforted him. What the hell was going on? The stick bug shifted my dad's insides before pulling out a long and skinny organ, raising it to its mouth. I had to do something. Noticing my dad's shotgun leaning against the bedroom wall, I rushed to grab it, my mom watching me unworried as I grabbed the gun and pulled back its safety before lifting it towards the thing that could no longer be called Miss Baker. Bang! The stick bug fell lifelessly to the floor with one shot. My hands stung from the impact, my ears rang, and my shoulder shot back. Tears of fear flowed down my face, but the terror was far from over. I looked over to see my mom raise her finger towards my dad's neck. "Things are changing," she said, her finger contorted into a dagger looking like a pencil. "You'll change too," she said before stabbing my dad's neck. I screamed, "What are you doing?" I raised the gun up towards my mother but could not shoot. "Go ahead, it'll make no difference," she said. "We'll all be changed by the fog." Suddenly I heard the beating of my dad's heart. The beating grew as his chest began to expand, pulsing from the heart. His skin exploded, bones and viscera scattering across the room. The heart began to lift from his body, floating impossibly in the air, growing. It was the size of a basketball, then even bigger. The beating grew louder and louder, reverberating through my body. and into my head, giving me the strength I needed. I raised the gun towards my mom and fired another shot, hitting her in the abdomen. Her hands covered her stomach, but she was not even stunned. A smile pursed her lips as she fell onto the floor. The heart continued to beat, root-like veins beginning to grow out of it, reaching into the open air. As if searching for a new body, I stood there in shock, unsure of what to do. I raised the rifle again. Should I shoot the heart too? What good would it do though? But before I can even decide, I hear the front door groaning open. It was Rosie. I sprinted out of the room and down the hall, towards the open door. The door that was open with Rosie not in sight. Incident 8. Tears streamed down my face as I ran outside and into the fog. I would not let Rosie be taken. I would not let her die. I searched frantically for her. The fog was thick, but not as thick as it was before. It didn't try to enter my mouth or invade my nostrils. However, I could still feel the cold mist in my lungs. Rosie, I screamed with all my might. Where are you? There was no answer. Then I saw her shirt, followed by her shoes and pants, even her socks. I followed the clothes until I reached something moving on the ground. Something that could not be Rosie. It can't be, I cried, tears rolling down my cheeks once again. But it is. Even though she had changed, I could still see the bracelet I gave her around her disfigured wrist. Rosie was a jumbled mulch of flesh no bigger than a box. She had no limbs other than the one arm, the same arm that held her bracelet. Just a jumbled piece of meat. She couldn't move, but her long arm reached towards the floor, dragging her forward. Emerald eyes riddled the body and a flap could be seen on her side, a flap that opened and allowed her to speak. She's nearly here, she said, her voice unnatural and broken. The hand on her back reached forward again, dragging her across the hard cement, a trail of blood following her path. I grabbed my sister, lifting her into my arms. My mind became calm and determined, the gun strapped to my back. I began to walk forward, following where my sister was headed. Deep down, I knew that answer to everything would be there. The further I walked, the more dense it became. I began to hear the beat of a drum, a singular note booming through the fog every couple of seconds. I continued to walk forward, my eyes unable to see anything but white. The beating of the drum grew louder and louder until I burst through the fog into an opening as if some sort of barrier was keeping the fog away from its center. In the center of the opening sat a creature that looked like a circular vase which was blowing out the fog. It was larger and taller than me, with a big base but a slender neck that ended in a hole that emitted the fog. The fog covered the air above and around us, yet the bubble we found ourselves in was completely fog-free. The creature had 4 long arms with 4 joints each. 3 of them swirled around its body before gracefully lifting up into the sky and repeating this process again and again, like some sort of ritual, while its 4th arm was on its back and it slammed into it once every couple of seconds, making the drum-like sound. Boom. This thing was the cause of the fog, the cause of our suffering, of everything. I gently placed Rosie on the ground. She groaned and muttered inaudible words as I grabbed the rifle from my back and lifted it toward the creature. Rot in hell, I said before firing. The creature crumbled from its midsection, a whirring of air escaping its body. I shot again and again, making sure every last piece of it fell to the floor. Satisfied, I lowered the gun and stepped towards its remains, making sure it was truly dead, when I heard a voice. It's already too late, my mom said, and I spun around to see her standing behind me with lifeless eyes, the bullet holes where I shot her filled with fog. She's already here. Incident 9, the fog around us swirled towards the center, condensing into a single point. My vision was temporarily blinded as the fog swirled around me. She's here, Rosie said. The fog swirled. Yes, Rosie, she's finally here, Mom said. I could hear the beating of a heart, the beating of Dad's heart. She's here, a voice that barely resembled Ms. Baker's said. The fog began to lift from my eyes and only an egg-like shape remained floating slightly above the ground, condensed and pure, nearly solid. And then it cracked, and spilling from the fog were 2 long wings. Her arms emerged next, then her long hair spilled behind her, floating and blowing with the breeze like a cape on her shoulders. The egg began to disintegrate, her long legs emerging and arms clasped together as if in prayer. She's finally here, the god of the fog, my mom said, amazed. The woman made of fog opened her pale eyelids, but what they contained was not fog. It was the universe itself, every single thing contained in the marbles that could be called her eyes. Slowly, the woman unclasped her hands and lifted her arms to the side. A portal was held underneath her arms, and from them, countless of indescribable creatures poured out, filling our world. The woman then reached her hand forward and pointed it towards my mother. A tendril of smoke extended from it, piecing my mother through her chest. My mother made a sort of hiccup sound as her body began to change. Her body began to fold in on itself, merging into one another, becoming like the trunk of a tree as it hardened. Suddenly, two large, beautiful wings sprouted from her body like a giant butterfly. A mass raised up from her body and took the form of a mouth, two eyes appearing on her wings center. She looked at me. This is what we were meant to be, how it was always meant to be. Our goddess has come, and with her a new world, a new beginning. You'll change too, Andy. Don't be scared. You'll turn into what you were meant to be. Her voice was higher than normal, with a weird echo, like the voices of an angel. Her wings stretched further and she took flight, soaring through the sky. The god of the fog raised her left arm up now, towards the sky, and from it the fog poured out like roots, branching into every house in the neighborhood. I heard some screams, some cries before the newly made creatures poured from all the houses in the neighborhood. There was a whale that floated in the sky with a shell for a back, a boar-like creature with a mouth like the tentacles on a squid, a tall and skinny creature that soared high into the sky, and so many more. This is what we'll all become. I heard my mother's voice from far away. A crab-like creature larger than a house came too, with its house that it lifted from the ground. All of the creatures circled around the god of the fog, admiring her beauty as she flew higher into the sky before millions and millions of roots sprouted from her finger, searching far and wide for the next human soul. Stunned, I grabbed my sister and ran, watching as the being stared at me with its galaxy eyes. I ran into my house and typed this all out. And I'm here now, shaking and unsure of what to do. The sky is covered in her roots now, and I know it's only a matter of time before they cover the entire world and reach every human. At first I did not know why she had spared me, but I was already exposed to the fog, had already breathed it in. I can feel myself changing into something new, something beautiful, into what I was always meant to be. Maybe you shouldn't run and cower from the fog when it eventually reaches you. After all, a little fog never hurt anyone. Okay, some context. My boyfriend, let's call him Joe, was diagnosed with epilepsy when he was a kid and has suffered from grand mal seizures throughout most of his childhood. They were apparently quite severe. Doctors all around the country didn't expect him to live very long. Joe would reportedly see things when he had the seizures. He would even hear things that weren't there, things he couldn't explain. What was especially strange, however, was that when he was around 19 or 20 years old, the seizures suddenly stopped, and since that point, nothing. Nada. It was a miracle, people said, a true God-given miracle. After beating all odds, my boyfriend graduated college, tactfully got Seize the Day tattooed on his left bicep the second he did, started his own line of bakeries, adopted 2 adorable border collies, and, well, he met me. And we've been living happily ever since, or at least as happily as 2 middle-class proletariats in this economy can. That was all until 3 days ago, and trust me, there is nothing happy about what I'm going to tell you. Day 1. Out of all the days, this was the least scariest, which may not seem the case from the onset. Joe, oh my god, fuck, I said, my eyes swimming with tears, as I watched the EMT workers hoist my boyfriend onto a stretcher. He was convulsing uncontrollably, hot foam leaking out of his mouth, his eyes rolling in and out of his head. Again, bear in mind I said this was the least scariest of days. Ma'am, I heard one of the nurses say, ma'am, please step back. It's alright. It wasn't alright. This wasn't supposed to happen. Joe said this wasn't supposed to happen. I don't understand, I said hoarsely. I don't understand. We'd just gone to sleep, that's all. And then I heard him start to mumble something next to me. I couldn't make out what he was saying, and when I turned around, oh god, I hiccuped. The nurse put a comforting hand on my shoulder. Ma'am, has your husband? He's not my husband. Oh, sorry. No, it's fine. Has he had a history of seizures? Joe had now been loaded into the ambulance. The 2 EMT workers closed the door behind him. They'd asked me if I wanted to accompany him to the ambulance, but I didn't feel up to it. I turned toward the nurse, still shaking. Yes, he does have a bit of a history actually. I can't exactly remember our conversation past that point. It was long and technical and honestly very, very boring. I went to sleep on our couch shortly after, exhausted and worried sick. I'd called Joe's mom, who cut the phone as soon as she heard what happened, presumably rushing to the hospital herself. I'm not sure why I didn't accompany Joe to the hospital that night, but I had a feeling. There were a couple details I'd left out from my discussion with the nurse, one being that Joe hadn't actually made it to bed at all. I was already fast asleep by the time he had returned from, well, wherever it is he often returned from lately. You see, over the past couple of months or so, Joe's been disappearing for hours on end, always late at night. It was unusually particular. He'd first come home at 6 p.m. from work, smelling of butter and honey, freshly baked bread. Even though Joe was making more than enough money to not be working in his own bakeries, he insisted it was good for morale, and he genuinely loved baking, which I thought was sweet, and he continued to be sweet after this point. He'd ask me about my day, make me dinner, put on an old romantic comedy or 90s horror flick, and we'd be snuggled up on our couch with our dogs, laughing or hiding under the blankets depending on what we settled on. The only abnormal thing Joe would do during this time is check his watch every damn minute. Then he would promptly slip out from under the blankets at 10 p.m., mumble something about having to check in on the shop or needing to pick up his mother, and he'd take off, leaving me in the house alone and with questions. The first few times he did this, I didn't mind. I wasn't the kind of girlfriend who needed to know her partner's whereabouts 24/7. It was only when he started to do it every day, even weekends, when I really started to worry because Joe would only come back home at 3 in the morning. Joe wasn't sweet at all after 3. He was preoccupied, easily distracted, jumpy. The innocent switching on of a light switch would set the guy off, and his normally soft, gentle eyes would bulge out of their sockets, soullessly staring at me from the doorway as if he was seeing me for the first time in years. The first time this happened really freaked me out. I remembered giving a shout and switching the light off again immediately, unable to speak as my heart had leaped up so high into my throat. And the next morning, when I'd asked Joe what exactly he was doing so late at night, I didn't get a straight answer. I never did. He'd just laugh nervously, kiss me on the forehead, and tell me I worry too much, which leads me into the second detail I'd left out to the nurse, because I should have been worrying a lot more than Joe thought I was, given where I'd found him a little after 3 today, or how I found him, that is, naked, sprawled on the floor of our kitchen, shaking like a washing machine off balance, spewing thick liquid from his mouth all over the place. I damn near had a seizure myself upon seeing him. I remember the collies, meanwhile, whined and cried softly, circling around him as if they were in a trance. The reason I didn't tell the nurse any of this is because I, honest to God, thought I'd dreamt most of it up. I thought I dreamt up cleaning up after him, clothing him, dragging him from the kitchen into our bedroom, dialing 911 only after I'd done everything else. That last detail was probably the most disturbing. I counted maybe a full 10 minutes before seeing Joe on the floor of our kitchen and calling for help. If I didn't dream any of it, I don't know what came over me as to why I did it. It's almost like some external force had compelled me to do what it said, and that's not easy to explain to someone who dealt in the practice of sheer reality for a living, an idea that the next couple of days were the furthest away from. Day 2, I decided to pay Joe a visit in the hospital the next afternoon. His mother didn't take too kindly to it, however. How dare you? She hissed at me as soon as she was made aware of my presence. She was a short, stocky woman, incredibly overweight and very unpleasant to look at. How dare you leave him here all alone? How dare you not accompany my son? What were you thinking? I don't know, I answered truthfully. I wasn't thinking, I was wrought with worry. It was sickening. You're sickening, his mother spat. She luckily couldn't bar me from visiting Joe, however, given the fact that he'd put me down as his emergency contact and not her, so I was allowed to enter the room and rest my eyes upon the man I thought I knew, the man I might still love. I approached him cautiously. Joe. He'd been propped up in the hospital bed, an IV tube running from his arm and into the bag. His eyes were bloodshot, dead, and spit dribbled down his chin as he continued staring at the wall. Is he okay? I looked around at the elderly nurse who'd accompanied me inside. Oh dear, he suffered too much last night, the nurse said with a small toothless smile. His system is still in a bit of shock. I'm surprised his brain isn't coming out of his ears given the circumstances. Great. Thanks, nurse. How long will he be like this? All doll like. I said. We can only guess. Dr. Ball is still running tests. It's too early to say how severe the damage is, unfortunately. Hopefully only a week or two. Hopefully. Okay, thanks. Of course. And the nurse left, shutting the door behind her. Joe and I were alone now. Joe, oh, honey, I said quietly. I took a seat right next to his catatonic figure. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear me, but I truly am very sorry. Maybe if I called for help sooner. No response. Joe just continued to stare forward. I bowed my head down a little, choking back a sob. Teardrops splattered on the sanitized marble floors, tainting them, robbing them of their cleanliness, which is when I noticed his hands. Both were held up in the supine position, with the palms pointing upward. Not only that, but his right index and thumb were bent slightly. I felt a weird prickly sensation in my stomach when I saw this. It wasn't completely out of the ordinary, but it wasn't what I'd call ordinary either. I was so caught up looking at his hands, however, that I almost missed the fact that his eyes were suddenly on me, something I had the misfortune of finding out when I looked up at him again. Jesus. I sprung up at once, backing into the wall behind me and almost knocking over the IV pole. I didn't stick around much longer after that. Young lady, where do you think you're going? Joe's mother began as I burst out of the room, but I ignored her, my heart palpitating like it had never before. I stayed boarded up in our apartment afterward, disoriented. The dogs weren't helping either. I don't think I'd realized it until I got back home, but the two of them were continuing to follow each other in the kitchen, circling the spot where Joe had collapsed, something they were probably doing non-stop since the morning. Whining, crying. I guess I didn't dream any of it at all. I tried to lure them away with toys, treats, anything, but nothing worked. They were still in that weird trance. I considered moving them physically, but I simply didn't have it in me when I got close enough. When I looked into their eyes, both pairs of eyes reflected Joe's haunting stare in the hospital just a little too well. I then went to sleep with the door of my bedroom locked, ignoring all the missed calls that had been stacking up since the incident. Over half of them were from Joe's mother. Day 3. I woke up to the sound of people talking. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my window. What the hell? In true Joe-like fashion, I checked my watch and my heart skipped a beat. It was 3 in the morning. Joe and I lived on the second floor in our building, so noise pollution from the outside world was usually quite potent. I slowly slid out of bed, grabbing an empty bottle of wine from my bedside table to use as a makeshift weapon. Hey, I mean, you try coping with any of this shit without any alcohol. My gut roiling with foreboding, I approached the window, extending my hand toward the drapes. For some reason, I expected to see Joe standing there, which would have freaked me the fuck out. Don't get me wrong, but what I saw was much weirder. At least a dozen people were surrounding the apartment, ordered in a curved sequence. All their lips moved in a similar manner, issuing out what sounded like a chant. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, only he knows what we're after. And that's when I realized the people were moving forward rapidly in that same curved sequence, the numbers increasing in droves. The bottle of wine crashed to the floor, but I didn't care. I unlocked my bedroom door at once, tearing into the hallway, panicking. I got to the kitchen, they continued to circle, but I ignored them, lunging toward the window by the sink instead. I snapped the latch and lifted the window upward, not only letting in cold air but the chance. I stuck my head out to get a better look, and, sure enough, there were people behind my apartment too, circling around the perimeter. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Men, women, children, people of all colors, all shapes and sizes, they circled around my apartment like it was an altar, unified in their message. I even recognized one of them, Ernie, Joe's business partner. I couldn't stop staring. Okay, surely I was dreaming now, right? But it wasn't a bad dream necessarily. I think I actually had half a mind to join them. The sudden ring of my phone broke me out of it. However, hello, I croaked into the receiver. Get to the hospital now. Something is terribly wrong. They won't leave him alone. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. My blood went cold. It was Joe's mother. She sounded absolutely hysterical. What's wrong? Just get to the fucking hospital. Yeah, okay, I'm on my way, I said shakily, cutting the phone hastily, my head swimming. I grabbed a coat and bounded down the stairway, exiting the complex. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. Everyone was much more terrifying up close, especially the kids. They didn't pay me any attention at all as I quickly passed, doing my best to avoid joining in, no matter how much I wanted to. A couple loud beeps cut through the chance when I unlocked my car, which been parked opposite of the building. My breathing now sharpened from both fear and the chilly weather. I got into the car at once and stuck in the key and twisted it. I looked to my right, eyes locking in on the people again. Jesus. I raised my phone up and snapped a picture, just in case I had to explain this to someone later on. Then I stepped on the gas. I rushed inside the hospital as soon as I got there, almost slipping on the wet, icy asphalt multiple times as I did. As soon as I entered the seemingly abandoned building, Joe's mother, sweaty as a pig, her makeup nothing short of dribbling tar, grabbed me by the hand, pulling me as she let out a raspy, "Finally, please, I don't know what's wrong, they just won't leave him alone." Who won't leave him alone? But my question had been answered as soon as Joe's mother pulled me into the dimly lit ICU. Doctors, nurses, and other staff members, in that same trance, were circling around Joe's bed, Dr. Ball and the elderly nurse included. Joe, meanwhile, was still propped up in the bed, staring ahead as he was yesterday. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. They've been at it for at least half an hour, Joe's mother whispered. All I'd done was doze off, and when I came back to my senses, ain't nobody was around. That's when I found them all here. I don't understand, I just don't understand what's happening. I don't either, I said, my skin crawling with trepidation at the scene unfolding in front of me. What? Why did you call me? Why did you call me and not the cops or someone else? Because I couldn't. Could I? Couldn't. I repeated, and I pulled Joe's mother into the hall, having no desire to stay by the ICU. How could you call me but not anyone else? Oh, dear, believe me, I wanted to call anyone but you, but I'd lose signal every time I tried. I tried calling law enforcement, Joe's sisters, our friends, our family, but nothing. Nothing. She sniffled. Desperate times call for desperate measures, so I called you. And here we are. Fucking typical, huh? I wasn't really listening, however. I was on the verge of a panic attack, to be honest with you. Mrs. Prance, I said, slowly. Let's pretend Joe's last name is Prance. Mrs. Prance, did Joe ever tell you what he saw or heard in those visions he had as a kid? During the seizures? No, he'd only ever tell his father, Mrs. Prance said. She wasn't doing a good job of hiding the bitterness in her voice. He only really ever taught me one thing. It's the only thing he told the doctors too, which is, she gave a strained mix between a laugh and a cry. Well, you've already heard it, haven't you? I don't follow. Mrs. Prance took me by the hand again, dragging me in front of the ICU again against my will. I really didn't want to go back. I had no desire to return, and yet I was here again. Free the master, break the bonds, oh God's messenger, the Messiah, only he knows what we're after. And Joe's eyes fell on me again, still just as soulless, and then his mouth moved. Free me, oh God's messenger, break the bonds. Just like my conversation with the EMT the first day, I don't remember too much after this point. All I remember is that I woke up in my apartment, in my bed, later on today. I obviously revisited the dream hypothesis again, but that went out the window as soon as I noticed the shattered glass from the wine bottle on the floor. My visitors had all vanished, however. The collies had vanished from the kitchen too. The reason I'm writing this at all is because of a recent message I'd woken up to. Of course, it was from Mrs. Prance. It simply read, Joe is being discharged from the hospital at noon. A week or two my ass. It's 11 and I have no idea what to do. What is there to do except wait when another Messiah has evidently returned from the dead? At first, it seemed to be just the adults and it made sense, with the recession and all. People were working longer and harder than ever, but then every night on the news a story would run about how more and more people were slipping into coma-like states, going into deep sleep and never waking up. World governments rushed to find the source of this epidemic. All virus and disease control studies came back negative. Strict extended holiday policies were put into place across all businesses, and work and school hours were reduced. All food and even tap water was now even enriched with caffeine in a last-ditch attempt to slow down whatever was happening. Of course, there were conspiracy theorists who decided to consume only baby food, which was excluded from the caffeine supplementation. They believed it to be all an elaborate ruse from the government for population control. There were stories of people going into a deep sleep and their family would try to visit them in hospitals, but being unable to find them. But on the news, these theories were often factually debunked. Hospitals filled to the brink with deep sleep patients. They began repurposing multi-story car parks to fit beds instead of cars, and slowly but surely, without reason, it seemed that everyone and everything was susceptible. It wasn't uncommon to now see birds fall out of the sky, or even sleeping beside cats and dogs on the sidewalk. It wasn't long before driving and commandeering all vehicles was banned. Too many cases of people falling asleep at the wheel, or worse, pilots falling asleep at the wheel of domestic flights. Trains continued for a while but also saw a ban. This led to a global lockdown of sorts. You wanted to travel to other cities. Walk or cycle. Bicycles were manufactured and sold in a minute. Police used electric ones to patrol the streets, and for normal people our main mode of transport was push bikes. Stories were circulating of people cycling to countries to visit a family member only to find them on their couch or in their bed in a deep sleep. It's crazy how quickly humans adjust to new realities. All of a sudden, all of this just became the norm. I come from a rather unique family. My father met my mom at 4 in the morning. He was a clerk at a gas station and she was driving around aimlessly, playing music as she couldn't sleep when she needed gas. They both hit it off, and it's fair to say that both are pretty hardcore insomniacs, even to this day. Needless to say, this trait somehow passed on to me. I joke that the three of us are like a family of cats, only taking these little naps at random times yet being able to operate like the 7 to 8 hour sleepers. Maybe we were lucky, but we'd never fall into those deep sleeps. My parents were nervous every time I'd put my head down on a pillow, yet deeply relieved when I'd get up, and often I'd surprisingly feel refreshed, almost like I was sleeping better than ever. I was wondering how that could be in such troubling and uncertain times. Why now am I getting the best rest of my life? My parents echoed similar remarks about their restful naps when a theory popped into my head. What if we have hit a point of evolution where it is imperative that we adapt to napping as our main method of sleep? I exclaimed to my dad while I sat on the floor watching the nightly news on TV. "Don't be ridiculous," my father said in a conclusive tone. He was a kind and loving dad, but he had a stern side around certain subjects, and for some reason, sleep was one of them. I've always been super curious about what they are calling the deep sleep epidemic. I would say most people have it at the top of their lists of concerns. My mom and dad were different though. Their problems seemed to be primarily focused on what was now considered rather trivial, like mortgages and old world stuff. They only seemed concerned with the deep sleep when it came to me. We lived in a big house, and to my friend's disbelief, I had never met any extended family of any sort, from what I understood. Both my mom and dad's side had disagreed with my parents forming such a young infatuation and marriage, rather extreme I believe, as they were 19 and 20 at the time, and old enough to make their own decisions. When I turned 18, I was presented with some very surprising news that my mom couldn't give birth, so they adopted me very young. I have no memory of my time before my parents' care or of an orphanage. My school therapist told me this can be a common response to instability when you are very young. She labeled it dissociation. In the old world, I could always feel a layer of isolation around me and my family. We lived in a big house with no pets and rarely any visitors. I went to a private school and my classes consisted of 3 to 4 students. 5 students were considered a packed class. You can imagine my surprise at seeing school depicted on the TV. It was ludicrous to see so many people crammed into such a space. It didn't make sense to me. My father liked to keep things private in regards to his life. He told me he got a lucky break after his time in the gas station, and following meeting my mom, this landed him into a completely new life with more money than he could ever imagine. This lucky break was a job that he'd go to at 2 a.m. to 4 p.m. He was out and gone and back not a fraction late ever at 4:10 p.m. This meant that his workplace must have been close and his work very routine. Throughout the years, I always asked if there was a bring your kid to work day, as I'd seen this concept a lot on TV. He'd laugh and say it doesn't really exist yet. I've been on the internet once and I googled it, and I know it does. We got the highest speed internet installed years ago, but it had to be taken out as I was told it was interfering with a local advanced electric power transmission that was apparently utilizing every possible frequency and signal. They installed a much weaker internet and it's painstaking to use. I'd go bored having read my library of books thrice over, and my parents would bring me more from my collection, or I'd rent some from my private school library. The librarian has been been in a deep sleep for 6 weeks, however, so the library is only allowed to be used when one of our teachers are present. I had a mundane dream imagining what this advanced electric power transmission tower looks like, and climbing over layers of big walls to see it. I woke up from a small nap, only 15 minutes long, and I was hit with a wave of euphoria. It was almost like being on some kind of drug or happily drunk. I let out a random laugh and recalled a book I read about dreams and how REM sleep typically commences hours into the sleeping state. I heard some faint joyous jazz music coming from down the stairs in the living room, so I walked down the winding stairs as the music got louder. The warm lights of the living room saturated the darkness of the hallway in a rather mystical way. I peered around the corner to see my mom and dad smile from ear to ear in an energetic and almost childlike dance. They looked to be having the time of their lives, and this subsequently made me happy, but when they noticed my presence they seemed to calm themselves down and attempt to jump back to a normal spirit. No, I exclaimed, sorry to interrupt. I'm glad you guys are having a good time. You must be hungry, dear. My mom brushed her dress down and resumed normalcy. No, I feel bad for stopping your dance, I laughed. I was happy that everyone was in such a good mood tonight. My dad let out a big burst of laughter. He couldn't help but find the whole situation hilarious. I could tell he was in an incredible mood. We are all in such a great mood tonight. We should do something, I exclaimed. It only gets better, my dad blurted out. From the corner of my eye, I observed my mom, albeit distantly in the kitchen, temporarily snap out of her elated mood. To give my dad a glance that he said something he shouldn't have. My dad doesn't catch it as his laughter has brought him to putting his hands on his knees and looking at the floor. I can see that my mom has remained in her elated mood, yet she looks a little more on edge. Everything okay, Mom? She looks at me and I can tell in her eyes that she's slightly disconcerted, although her wide grin tries to tell me otherwise. Of course, darling. I know my mom well enough to see in this millisecond that she is scamming her brain for something to say. Oh, we should do something tonight. That would be fabulous. She found it. At this point, my dad is rolling on the floor. It's like he has taken a super drug and is in a state of absolute bliss and transcendent euphoria. Something doesn't quite feel right about my parents' lack of awareness now growing around their contrasting elation. My dad's happiness seems genuine, whereas my mom's appears to now be put on like a mask of sorts. Oh, there is something else. My eyes go back to my mom. Your school called today and unfortunately all of the staff have fallen into a deep sleep. Classes are cancelled for the foreseeable future. I'm stunned by the news and zapped into this existential dread. Once my mom sees this, she immediately mirrors me. A veil had fallen, a perception of my reality, and my whole life seemed to somehow fall. I was now suspicious of my parents. I look to my father and he's still hysterically happy until we catch each other's eyes and he springs up in full energy to his feet and also meets me with an artificial empathic glance. I feel fear in my own home, with my own mother and father. This is heavy news. You should go get some rest, son. My fight, flight or freeze had chosen to freeze, but I managed to give a single nod before heading back up the winding stairs. I heard the jazz music stop, but from the very top. I swear I could hear the shuffling of feet on the wooden floors before it went silent again. I arrived back to my room and threw myself back onto my bed. A rapid knock on my door and my heart began to race. My mom enters with a big decorative tray. I've brought your favorite food, sweet potato fries, she says in an overly enthusiastic tone. I work up the courage to ask Mom, if my teachers have gone into a deep sleep, why were you and Dad so happy and dancing? My heartbeat begins to speed a bit as I get the question out. She scoffs, son, life goes on. If you get hung up on every little tragedy, then you will never live. Besides, me and your father won't have to pay the overpriced tuition anymore, and you can be homeschooled. We've found a tutor already, my mom continues, what feels like a seemingly well-rehearsed response when my father walks in. A completely different man than what I had seen downstairs. He appears almost mournful, but it's almost like he's really trying to hold himself back from grinning, like a child at a funeral who doesn't understand the gravity or context of the situation. But these were teachers I really loved, and Mrs. Jones, the librarian, they really cared about us students. I interrupted. My dad points to the big clock in my room that reads 1 a.m. Well, look at the time. I have work in an hour. He softly grabs my mom on her shoulders and ushers her to go to bed with him. We are really sorry for this news, son, and we understand how much your teachers mean to you, but now we must be getting to bed as I have work in an hour. My mom looks back on their way out, pointing to the sweet potato fries. "Enjoy your late supper, your tutor will be coming in the morning." They close the door, and I hear them close the door to their room down the hall too. I start to question what I've seen and felt this evening. Could the euphoria I woke up with cause me to be almost delirious? Am I imagining it all? What did my dream mean, and maybe it wasn't so mundane? In fear of waking my parents, I very quietly opened and closed my door. I needed some cold water to the face as I headed to the big bathroom that was halfway down the hall before I was met with a faint sound that was unmistakably like bouncing on the bed. I tiptoe to just outside my parents' door, and I hear quiet laughter. It sounds like they are having the time of their lives bouncing on the bed like children. This confirmed my unease. I knew from that moment I was going to my dad's work. I knew I had to learn more about these people I called my parents. I continued my tiptoeing down the winding stairs until I was swallowed into the darkness of the hallway. I hid behind a pullover curtain for what felt like half an hour before I was met with the sound of my dad ecstatically hopping down the stairs. He let out a childlike wee as he reached the bottom and jumped what sounded like 6 steps. His feet hit the floor and he marched in a military-like trance to the door. My parents never drank alcohol. They advocated against all substances, and I knew they wouldn't take anything knowingly. So what if they had somehow been drugged? This is a big possibility. Maybe the global scare is hitting them too, and this is their attempt to medicate the anxiety away. If so, my dad shouldn't be going to work anyway, so I must follow him. I rationalized my decision as best as I could, knowing a big part of me was also yearning to grow closer to my father and the strange newfound feelings of wanting to really protect him. He brushes past the curtain I am hiding behind and opens up the front door before swiftly closing it behind him. I peer out the small pattern window of the door, and to my disbelief, I see a luxurious black car parked with the engine running, waiting on my dad, who is now skipping towards the back seat. He opens the door and climbs in. I see a red suede interior, but I can't make out who is driving due to the deeply tinted windows. All cars are banned from use, so how on earth could my father be picked up in one? Just how illegal was his work? Many thoughts seemed to flood my mind. I used to go out to my back garden on the hill every night for hours and just look into the stars. I'd get lost in them. I would imagine dancing between them and feeling like I am astral projecting to and from each one, narrowly dodging them. Some nights these gray clouds just seemed to drift in and block everything. I would patiently wait for them to reveal some stars, almost like they presented me with some kind of hope. I would try my best to rendezvous with them every night, even better if the moon was out. Tonight it appeared starless. The car left in no time between my dad getting in and taking off down our driveway and through our gate. It must have been the adrenaline that fueled me to hop on my bike and race down the driveway before our automatic gates closed, but I was tailing the black car from a distance, just seeing the very back of it at every turn. It took down the forested back roads. I almost lost it due to how efficient the driver was. I hauled on both brakes as I saw the red brake lights of the car through the tree line. It was stopping. I hop off my bike and peer around the thick tree at the corner of the road. We were at the entrance of the advanced electric power transmission tower. It was the sight from my dream. I watched as the black car gained entry through layers upon layers of walls. I observed men dressed in army fatigues with heavy weaponry. So this is where my dad worked. There was no way I could breach it. A crazy idea came to mind. I knew my dad had a special uniform he'd wear that was always zipped in a black cover and hung in his wardrobe. He told me to never touch or open it, and he must have had about 7 uniforms at a given time, one for each day of the week, I'd assume. Unlike in my dream, I understood that these walls with guards are completely unscalable. Impersonating an employee such as my father is the only way I will be able to gain entry. It was a crazy idea, but what else could I do? As I turn to head home, I see headlights of what appears to be another car coming down the road. This time my fight or flight kicks in for the better, and I rapidly grab my bike and throw it into the bushes that line the forest before jumping into them myself. I land on a bush of thorns and do my best to silence my shriek of pain, but it doesn't work. An identical car to the one my dad was picked up in was parked directly on the road in front of me. It seems to hover for a moment, and it becomes clear that I have been spotted. The driver door flings open and what appears to be a tall, slender figure extends out, their face blacked out by what either appears to be a thin balaclava or worse, its skin. I get up and trip in the thorns as I try to run back into the shroud of the forest, but its arms seamlessly extend and entrap me like a spider suspending a fly, terrified, time froze as I was held and suspended 5 feet from the ground. A human emerges from the backseat of the car with what appears to be some kind of toolkit. He is wearing the same uniform that my dad left in today, and he also bolsters a large grin as he skips towards me. He jumps right over my bike and the thorns. He places the toolkit just where my feet were before the arms of the driver suspended me. He opens the toolkit and begins tying my feet together with this thick wire that appears to be alive. It spirals up and around my legs before tying my hands together and warping to close around my head and mouth. It prevents me from screaming out loud, and all I see and hear is black. I must have passed out from the panic as I could no longer feel the extended arms of the driver. I am lying down and I can feel a pillow on the back of my head. I feel like I am in a sensory deprivation tank with moments piercing in of where I really am. This has all been an elaborate lucid dream nightmare surely. I just can't open my eyes. It must be sleep paralysis. I scream, wake up, wake up. But my screams are still being silenced, and it's like they're echoing into some deep cavern of darkness you throw a stone into, with sound bouncing off the walls. Something relieves itself from covering my eyes, and I'm met with a blurred vision as I squint deeply at the new incoming light. It's faint and has a dull crimson overlay. I blink a lot, and with every blink, my vision becomes slightly more clear. I am in a circular pod that has just enough room to contain a bed, not tall enough for me to stand, but just enough for me to be able to sit up. I wish I never sat up. I wish I was put into a deep sleep because what I saw was far worse than any nightmare. I was in a profoundly big underground room with connecting tubes to the top of every sleeping pod, all leading towards this faceless humongous organism of warping, an animated flesh that was constantly animatedly moving and growing, feeding off the deep sleepers. Many tubes led up and out of the room. You could see for miles and miles until the end of the human side of these sleeper pods. It was the most startling sight anyone could ever see. One tube didn't lead from a sleeper pod, but it led to a very enlarged pod that contained computers and self-operating machinery that was drawing what appeared to be levels going up. A further tube was dispensing pills into another large pod that fell onto a conveyor belt where I saw men with my father's uniform collect and package them into typical household products such as water bottle packs, dinner packs, coffee grounds, and even dishwasher soap. I noticed that from these hundreds of thousands of pods of sleepers, I was the only one sitting up. I looked back at the big pod and saw a man looking at me through binoculars. I hear a sound and smell a faint gas enter the pod. I close my eyes for another little nap. I wake up in my bedroom with my parents intently watching over me, concealing the faintest grin. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where I should even begin with this. It's been almost a year to the day now that I experienced what I did. And in that time, I'd almost managed to convince myself completely that it hadn't been real. It was nothing more than your overactive imagination, Harry, I told myself day after day, one of those nightmares that seem so real. They stay with you for a long while, brought on by a traumatic experience. That's all it was, and alongside a few stiff drinks when my own words occasionally failed to convince me, I slowly began to forget. I slowly began to let it go and return to life as normal. Until yesterday, that is. You see, I'm someone who is very much into exercising. When I quit smoking 3.5 years ago, I decided to pour all my newly freed time and energy into getting fit. Not at first, though. It was only after I noticed that I was rapidly beginning to gain weight. I stepped onto the scale one morning to find to my shock that, for the first time in my life, I had gone over 200 pounds. That decided it for me. I set about picking up a cheap pair of running shoes from Walmart, grabbed an old pair of track pants from my closet, and began walking every day that I could. At the time, I wasn't in the best financial situation, so instead of getting a gym membership, I chose to use the neighborhood I live in for my workout. For roughly an hour or so every day, I'd wind my way through the residential streets before returning home, with a sheen of sweat covering my face. Slowly but surely, I felt myself begin to feel better and happier as I lost the weight. As I did, I moved on from speed walking to full-out jogging, and unless I had something to do or I was kept inside by the weather, I never broke my routine. And more to the point, despite the fact my neighborhood had a bit of a reputation for being a little seedy, I always felt safe when I went out. The people I saw were always friendly, shooting me nods and smiles as I passed. and nothing ever bothered me. That was until last spring. When I first woke up that morning, everything seemed as it always was, nothing more than an average January day in the Pacific Northwest. According to the weather app on my phone, the temperature would stay roughly in the low 50s, perfect for an exercise. And after scarfing down a bowl of Raisin Bran Crunch, banana and yogurt cup, I quickly brushed my teeth and began to get ready. I dressed, slipping into my running shoes as I pulled my jacket from the closet and slid it on. Finally, I snatched my house keys from their hook, slid my driver's license into the pocket of my sweatpants, and picked up my iPod, headphones, and sunglasses from the arm of the couch before unlocking the front door. A chilly blast of air struck me as I stepped outside onto the second-story landing of my apartment building, causing me to turn my collar up to shield my neck. Locking the door behind me, I quickly descended the stairs and took a moment to simply breathe in and listen. The smell of the Pacific Ocean filled my nostrils, causing me to let out a contented sigh. A few blocks down, I heard a dog begin to bark from someone's backyard, along with the droning sound of somebody mowing their lawn. As I turned to begin stretching, a loud buzzing sound came from overhead, and I tilted my head up to catch a glimpse of the orange underside of the Coast Guard helicopter as it zoomed over me. A small smile flickered across my lips as I quickly stretched, slipping the headphones over my ears and the sunglasses over my eyes. Holding the iPod up so I could see the screen, I slid my thumb around the wheel until I found what I'd been looking for, then clicked. A moment later, my ears were filled with the sweet, sultry sound of Diana Dors as the golden age of Hollywood actress began to sing a kiss and a cuddle. I shot one last look behind me at my apartment and the parking lot. Then I set off. The cool air felt nice against my face as I jogged, the slight wind blowing my hair back out of my eyes as I headed for the far end of my street. My neighborhood is arranged into a sort of rectangle, dead-ending at one end that presses up against the forest and back towards the main road. I would always alternate my path to keep things fresh, sometimes heading to the left and up Michigan Ave to the farthest block, and sometimes the opposite direction towards Fulton Ave. Today, I'd chosen the latter path. Houses and parked cars slid by me as I stared straight ahead, losing myself in the music and the beat of my feet on the pavement. Reaching a crest, I caught a glimpse of the estuary to my right, the sunlight reflecting off it like it was a diamond. Another smile played across my face as I headed down the other side, hopping onto the sidewalk to get out of the way of a Cadillac heading the other way. Don't forget to keep an eye out for anything, Harry, I mentally reminded myself. Reaching Fulton, I quickly spared a glance to my right, seeing cars and trucks pulling into the parking lot of the Lighthouse Market. A thought occurred to me, maybe I'll stop in and get a Gatorade or something when I'm done. I haven't been in there in a while. Turning away, I kept my pace steady, heading up the street before turning left onto S Wall. I passed by more cars and houses, noting with slight surprise that a few were up for sale. I shook my head as I remembered hearing about some residents moving back to the more populated parts of the state. People are nuts for wanting to leave here and go back to the cities. The thought kept turning over in my head as I began to head back up the incline. But as I passed by a dirt road that stretched between Wall and the next street over, my train of thought was torn away as a huge shiver shot up my spine. I knew instantly it hadn't come from the wind either. My collar was still turned up. And besides, it hadn't been the kind of shiver you get from it. It was an entirely different style, the kind you get when someone is watching you. I slowed to a stop, pausing the music and pulling the headphones off my ears as I looked around. The street was deserted. I saw no one standing in the front lawns or driveways of the houses nearby, and aside from the dull thud of loud music drifting from a house to my left, all I heard was the sounds of the birds in the trees and the distant sound of the lawnmower still running. Turning to my right, I shot a glance down the dirt road to the next block. Nobody there either. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind trying to make sense of the sensation. After a moment, though, I simply shook my head and shrugged my shoulders. I guess it was nothing more than a chill, and you, for whatever reason, getting a little paranoid. Sighing, I slid the headphones back on my head and hit play, Diana's voice almost instantly soothing me as she shifted into I Feel So. Shaking off the last tendrils of discomfort, I turned away and resumed my jog, heading towards Michigan Ave and the opposite end of the neighborhood. I wish to God I'd listened to my gut reaction and just gone home right there and then. Reaching the other end of the neighborhood, I quickly moved up Michigan and hung a right onto Wasson Street. This was a street that had become infamous to me for the amount of dogs that would rush to the edges of the fenced-in yards, yapping their heads off at me as I passed. However, to my surprise, none came rushing forward as I passed by the houses I knew them to be located. I guess the owners think the weather's too cold to keep them outside today or something. I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth, though I kept going, shooting quick looks to the left and the right each time I came to a four-way intersection to make sure no speeding cars caught me by surprise. Some jackasses in the neighborhood tended to blast through at twice the posted speed limit more than a little often. Again, though, I was pleasantly surprised to not see a single car driving on the roads. This may be a better jogging session than I thought it would be. I decided that I would end the session by jogging down to the main road once I was done and head down to the boat ramp. Whenever I was in a good mood, I liked to walk through it, stopping to drink in the salt air and quickly shoot a look over at the cam, a beautiful, yet sadly rusted and abandoned ship moored next to it. I reached the crest of the hill and began heading down, approaching the cross with Pacific Ave. I slowed, always stopping before crossing the second main street that made its way through our neighborhood into the next suburb. Reaching it, I shot a look to the left and right for cars. Seeing none coming, I began to step down from the sidewalk and cross the street. But as I looked up and ahead, I froze, almost in mid-step. Someone was standing across the street. They were on the opposite side of the street to me, not standing on the sidewalk, but slightly back on the front lawn of a house. Normally, this wouldn't have caused me to pause. I saw people out and about every single time I went for a run. What caused me to stop, though, was just how weird the person seemed. For one, they were staring straight ahead at the other side of the street, still as a statue. They never turned their head to the left or right, looking across to the yard across from them. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, due to the fact they wore a giant hooded sweatshirt or jacket of some kind. The hood completely obscured their face and blocked it from my view. For another few moments I watched the figure, waiting to see if they would move. But they remained perfectly still. Okay, even I have to admit that's a little weird. I shot a glance to the left, debating whether I should swing straight up to Cannon Street to avoid them. But then I shook my head. Now you are being paranoid, man. You've dealt with junkies and robbers before. One person in a hood isn't even close to as bad. My decision made, I shot another glance around, then jogged across the street, eschewing the sidewalk to stay on the road. As I approached the figure, I began mentally chiding myself for being such a pussy. I decided to be polite that I would nod and wave to the person as I passed them. Who knows, maybe it'll brighten their day. The figure continued to stare straight ahead as I approached, and as we drew level with one another, I did indeed nod quickly, giving a half smile and raising the hand not holding my iPod into a wave as I shot past. For a moment, I thought the figure wouldn't acknowledge my greeting and began to turn away, but then I saw them raise a hand of their own to return the gesture, and the hood gave an almost imperceptible nod as well. For a brief moment, I saw the lower half of their face, catching a glimpse of a pleasant smile as well, and then I was past them, heading down the slightly steep hill towards Fulton. I turned my head to look straight ahead again, mounting the far left sidewalk and maneuvering myself around a Ford Taurus which stuck out of a driveway. I again lost myself in the music and workout, making my way to the end of the street. As I got to the intersection, I chose to spare a look back the way I'd come, and I felt a shiver rocket up my spine. The figure had turned to look down the road after me, right at me. Instantly I turned away, feeling quite uncomfortable by the sight. Another shiver shot through me, letting me know he was still watching me, and I hurried to head up the street to the final block of my exercise. But I couldn't seem to shake the feeling loose from me. As I jogged past a wooden fence, I attempted to force the image from my mind. Not jogging on that stretch of road for a while, that's just a little too weird for me. Shooting a look down, I saw the sidewalk begin to curve, indicating I'd reached the street. I looked up and stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't standing on the corner of Fulton and Cannon. I wasn't even near it. Instead, I looked up to see the rectangular green sign proclaim that I was at the corner of South Wall Street. Confusion washed over me like a sneaker wave. What the hell? I shot a look behind me. Below me, I saw the street sign for Maple Street, along with the edge of Lighthouse Market at the end. Sparing a glance the other way, I saw the 2 blocks above me, stretching up to the yellow dead-end sign. I shook my head, struggling to understand. I don't understand. Did I just imagine all of that? Did I get that lost in the music and my own thoughts? It was possible. I'm a writer, and oftentimes I use the jogs as time to plan out stories in my head to write when I get home. And unfortunately, I tend to have an overactive imagination for someone my age, with a tendency to get lost in daydreams. That's the only thing it could be, the only logical one. Anyways, I took a deep breath, trying to silence the tiny voice in the back of my head, one that incessantly chided at me that I didn't have that much of an imagination. Forcing it away, I did the only thing I could think to do. I turned and began jogging again, heading up Wall Street. The surge of energy that coursed into my veins gave credence to the idea I'd simply imagined the last few minutes, and I forced myself to concentrate on the road ahead, only allowing myself a single thought about it. That might make a good premise for a story, gotta keep that one in mind for when I get home. Then I increased my pace, allowing the music to wash everything else away. I reached Michigan, and like I'd imagined, turned right onto Wasson. As I continued, I noted that no dogs came to bark at me from the yards and driveways. Just like before, I pushed the thought away. I hadn't come through before. I only daydreamed I did. Forcing the thought away, I continued, passing by houses and parked cars as I approached that intersection with Pacific Ave. As much as I chided myself, however, I refused to look up until I reached the road's edge. Then I looked across and began laughing at what I saw. There was a shape there, exactly in the spot where I'd imagined I'd seen the figure, but it wasn't a hooded person at all. It was a small tree or bush, one which had been trimmed and shaped into an odd shape. One that, if you weren't paying close enough attention, could easily be mistaken for a person in the right light. Instantly I realized the shape must have stuck in my mind from the last time I'd gone out. Shrubbery. You got creeped out by a freaking shrubbery. I let out another laugh and quickly shot a glance around before crossing the street. Approaching the bush, I hit pause on my music and slipped my headphones off, the sound of my chuckles filling my ears as I shook my head. I spoke aloud. Harry James Lake, you, my friend, are indeed one hell of a pussy. You're supposed to scare your readers, not yourself, and especially not over fucking shrubbery. Chuckling again, I began to slip the headphones back on, but I stopped as I realized something. The sound of the lawnmower, the music, the barking dog, all of it had stopped. The neighborhood was completely and totally silent. It wasn't a new experience. There had been times before when things felt completely still out here. It didn't stop it from being creepy as shit when it did, though, because it feels like you're the only person alive around here when it does. Shivering slightly at the eeriness of it all, I turned and looked at the bush, and couldn't help but shiver again as the image of the hooded figure smiling and waving back at me wormed forward in my mind. Jamming the headphones back over my ears, I hit play, Diana's singing again filling my ears. This time, however, her voice didn't bring me the warm and relaxed feeling it usually did, only a thin veneer of it. Turning away, I quickly jogged away from the spot, trying to ignore the chills that shot up my spine and refusing to look behind me as much as my instincts screamed at me to. I reached the end of the block and turned left, making sure to keep my eyes up and focused on the street sign ahead. I drew alongside the tall wooden fence of someone's yard, increasing my pace and feeling more confident that I would reach it. That's when something slammed into the fence from the other side, hard enough for it to buckle. Fucking hell, I shouted aloud, leaping off the sidewalk and half into the street as I tore my headphones off. Instantly, my ears were filled by the sounds of what had to be one hell of an aggressive dog barking on the other side. It again struck the fence, the sounds of it scratching fiercely at the wood rising with its guttural cries. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. My heart raced in my chest, and I bent over slightly, putting my hands on my legs as I let out a nervous, choked laugh. Jeez, I'm freaking crow, man. Frick, I lifted one hand and rubbed my face, sliding under my sunglasses to rub at my eyes. People need to freaking train their dogs better. That almost gave me a damn heart attack. I let out another nervous laugh, then forced in a few more deep breaths. My heart began to slow, and I felt my breathing return to normal. The slow, dull ache of my well-worked muscles began to sing in my body as I stood still. The dog had thankfully stopped attempting to ram through the fence at me. The barking had stopped, it likely realizing I hadn't posed any threat. I slipped my headphones back on my head, then stood up straight, my eyes lifting to look ahead of me, and I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I wasn't beside the wooden fence anymore. I was back down at the intersection with Wall. Shock filled me. I knew I hadn't daydreamed at this time. I had jogged around the 2 streets, and I knew I had been about to reach Cameron when the dog had startled me. So how in the hell was I suddenly 2 blocks in the opposite direction? The biggest chill yet flooded through me, and I took a step backwards, looking around. Just as it had been my entire jog, I saw nobody outside, and since I hadn't turned on my music again, I could hear that it was still dead silent in the neighborhood. Emphasis on the fucking dead part. As I stood there, a familiar yet most unwelcome shiver shot up my spine again, the same one I'd had when I felt I was being watched. Even though I couldn't see anyone, the feeling remained, and I didn't like it one damn bit. I turned and looked down the road. The bright white roof and large sign of the market looked like, ironically considering its name, a lighthouse beacon in the situation I'd now found myself in. I made my decision in a microsecond, speaking aloud. Yep, we're going this way now. And with that, I began jogging quickly down the road, the hill increasing my speed as I went along. I kept my eyes trained on the roof as it began to grow in size, and a renewed sense of hope began to fill me. I'm gonna make it to the store. Yes, I pumped my legs faster, ignoring the burning protest that came from them. That was when the sun, I honestly don't know. The only way I can describe it is that it was like one of those spinning dimmer's light switches in a person's house, able to crank up the brightness at will. One moment, I was speeding towards the market, the sun only mildly blinding me as I burst out from beneath the trees. The next, it suddenly intensified, so bright that even with the sunglasses on, I had to squeeze my eyes shut. I continued to run, though, refusing to stop. A moment later, the sun seemed to return to normal, and I opened my eyes, blinking a few times to rid my vision of the black and blue spots that had taken residence in them. I was running past Wasson Street, towards South Wall. I skidded to a stop, almost slipping on some loose gravel and falling as a mixture of shock and disbelief slammed into me like a Peterbilt. For a moment, I stared, blinking. Then I spoke, my voice rising into a shout. What the actual fuck? Nobody answered me, the sound of my voice almost seeming to shatter the silence like a baseball through a plate glass window. Yet another chill shot up my spine, and I cast an increasingly paranoid look around, seeing, as always, exactly nobody. What the hell is going on? I swallowed hard, casting a look back down at the market below. Part of me wanted to try running for it again. I almost did. But somehow, I knew if I did, something would bring me right back here, like I'm stuck in some kind of loop. The thought made a sudden burst of fear shoot through me. I looked around, my brain screaming at me to come up with some kind of a plan. Only one came to mind. I began running to the nearest house. Reaching it, I slammed my hands against the front door in the loudest, most frantic knocking I had ever done. Hello, please, if anyone's in there, I need help. I waited for a moment, but nobody came to the door. I quickly moved to the house next door, again banging and calling for help. Like before, nobody answered, and with blind panic beginning to rear its ugly head, threatening to consume me, I began to race from house to house, from apartment building to apartment building, banging on every door and screaming my lungs out. Some of them had lights on in their windows, while others were dark. But the outcome was always the same. Nobody came to the door, and my screams seemed to echo off the buildings and cars, drifting and dying away. I felt my sanity traipse precariously towards a knife's edge as I reached the corner of Wall in Michigan, my throat beginning to sting from screaming so much. I cast a look to the left, my eyes widening as I saw the side of my own apartment building just a single block down. Home. Without even thinking, I began sprinting for it, a mixture of fear and hope filling every fiber of my being as it drew nearer. More hope surged as I reached the corner, where my foot caught a raised slab of pavement. I fell ass over tea kettle, the concrete tearing at my hands and wrists. For a few moments I simply lay there, breathing heavily and terrified of what I'd see when I looked up. Finally, I forced myself to lift my head, and I felt tears begin to seep from my eyes and utter hopelessness fill me, because I was back at the corner of Michigan and Wall. I think a small bit of my sanity cracked then and there, because the next span of time, which I'm honestly not sure how long it was, is nothing but a blur of running down the same 2 streets I'd somehow found myself trapped in, like I was a rat in an endless maze. I can vaguely remember the sounds of my own screams and shouts echoing in the silence, hands, remember slamming my hands against doors, sometimes even the same repeatedly, and I can vaguely remember that no matter what I did, I always ended up back at the corner again, no matter where I tried to run. But there is one thing I can recall with crystal clarity, and that was the seemingly unending feeling of being watched, of being observed, and not by anything you would remotely call benevolent. I'm not sure when I snapped back to reality. Time seemed to matter little in the loop I found myself in. The sun refused to move at all from its position high in the sky, even though what must have been hours passed. But suddenly, I became cognizant of myself again, myself and my surroundings. The first thing I realized was that I was back at the cross street of Wasson and Pacific. I looked down at my hands, one which somehow still clutched my iPod in an almost death grip. My knuckles were red and raw from how much I must have been banging against the doors, and my throat felt as if someone had jammed a red-hot poker down it. My cheeks were wet from crying, and my lungs felt as if they were on fire. The second thing I realized was what stood across the street from me on someone's front lawn. It was the figure, not the bush shaped like a figure. The figure, it still stood as still as a statue, just like the first time I'd seen it, which I now knew hadn't been a daydream. The hood still covered its head, and it stared straight ahead at the opposite side of the street. A surge of fear welled up in me as I realized I couldn't see the bush anymore. My mind raced. How long has it stood there? How many times did I pass by it without realizing? How long has it been watching me? And what does it want? The final thought sent a new emotion through me, likely the only one I could still feel besides fear and blind panic. Anger, red-hot anger, rage being the better descriptor, began to boil inside of me as the dots connected. It had to be the reason I was here. It was the reason I was trapped in this hellish loop. All because what? I'd decided to be polite and smile and wave at it. The thought made the rage burn hotter, and even though part of me screamed not to, I began to march across the street towards it. My mouth opened, and I began to yell at it, to scream, actually, why the fuck are you doing this? What the hell do you want? I stopped about 15 feet from it, breathing heavily and feeling like I wanted to commit murder. I waited for an answer, waited for it to acknowledge my screams, but it simply continued to stare straight ahead, as if it hadn't even heard me. I was about to take another step forward when an almost deafeningly loud sound assaulted my ears. For a moment, I couldn't understand what it was, my mind unable to process. Then, I realized I'd still had my headphones on my head. My iPod had begun to play, and I quickly lifted the hand holding the device, unclasping my fingers and reaching out to stab at the off button, but I froze, both at the title and artwork displayed on the screen, as well as the vocals that began filling my ears. Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. I froze. Whatever rage I'd had seemed to die away instantly, replaced by the biggest, coldest shiver I'd ever felt shoot up my spine and causing me to gasp out loud. The singing continued, Buck Dharma's voice yelling at me to not fear the Reaper as the first chorus began. That was when the first tendrils of horror, beyond even the insanity-tearing amount I'd already felt, began to seep into me. I hadn't hit play, and I'd been listening to Diana Dors, not Blue Oyster Cult. It was as if the song had been selected on its own, almost as if it were some kind of a message. My eyes suddenly went wide, and feeling as though my heart were about to stop, I slowly lifted my head to look at the figure less than 20 feet in front of me, which had turned in my direction as I'd been preoccupied. The head was still bowed too low for me to see anything but its lower face. Then, it slowly raised one hand to wave at me. The fingers twittered like a person would do waving at a pet or a wild animal, ever so playfully. That movement alone sent a bolt of renewed terror through me, but it wasn't what made me scream, every part of me filling with existential horror. It wasn't what made me turn and begin sprinting away, dropping the iPod to the ground. The headphones tearing themselves off my head and the blaring music replaced with the shrill sound of my own screams as I felt my mind fracture into 1,000 pieces. It smiled at me, it grinned. I can't remember much after that, only vague snippets at most. And those I can't help but shudder at. Those I wish I could forget, because I remember shooting looks behind me to see that thing chasing after me, the hood still covering its head as it continued to grin at me, grin with a mouth far too wide for its face and filled with teeth that more closely resembled a shark or alligator than a human's, chasing after me but never touching the ground as it did. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, straps holding my arms and legs tight to the bed like I was a mental patient in an asylum. When I began calling out, a nurse, doctor, and to my surprise, an armed guard rushed into my room. For a few few moments, they stared at me as if I were about to attempt to attack them. But once they realized that I had returned to the land of the sane, they immediately began bombarding me with questions about what had happened to me, whether I took any kind of drugs or drank profusely, whether I had a history of mental illness. I wanted so badly to tell them the truth, but I knew the only thing it would do for me was buy me a one-way ticket to the funny farm, permanently, and so I lied. I told them that I'd been attacked on my run by a man who'd attempted to kidnap me. In my mind, I thought it'd explain my delirium to them. People who are kidnapped and manage to escape often do so with their mental state in a fragile state, if not completely broken. For a few moments, I thought they'd see right through my charade and call me out, but somehow they bought it. They brought the police in, asking me to give an account and a description of my attacker. On that, I didn't really lie, not much anyways. I told them that they'd hid their face under a hood of some kind, giving a vague description of some kind of well-built white man in his 40s, the kind that could easily overpower a slightly overweight 20-something-year-old guy. Again, they bought it. After showing me the sketch they'd made, one of the officers patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry, son," he said to me with a smile. "If he's still around here, we'll find him." Then he handed me something in a plastic evidence bag. "I believe this belongs to you. We found it a few blocks away from where we found you. You must have dropped it in the struggle." I couldn't say anything, only nod as I stared at my iPod, now scuffed with several scratch marks from its fall, and from something else, something which had made a single, deep gouge in the metal back of the device. I knew they'd never find any trace, because what, in a way, did kidnap me wasn't human, not even remotely human outside of vague appearances. I don't know how I managed to get away, how I managed to survive. I wonder if that thing was simply toying with me the same way a cat might toy with a bird when it's not hungry, or if I actually managed to break free. Either way, though, I'm thankful I'm still alive. Like I said at the start, after I'd returned home, and I guess for the sake of my own sanity, I began to endlessly tell myself that what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, hadn't been real, that I had, in fact, suffered a simple mental break, either from stress or actually being attacked by another person that day, that none of it had actually happened. When my own words didn't help, I'd replace them with alcohol, and slowly, surely, as the months went on, it did in fact begin to feel as though it had been nothing more than a waking nightmare. I slowly began to return to a normal life. I even went back to jogging, though I changed my route, choosing to jog through the next neighborhood over instead. Nothing ever happened to me, and I never felt like I was being watched again. Not by anything that wasn't human anyways. Until, like I said, yesterday, which is the reason I decided to write this, to share it with you. You see, I got a phone call from Mark, a friend of mine who recently moved into one of the emptied houses at the end of Wasson Street, where it links up with Fulton. He called, asking me to help bring some stuff of his. He couldn't fit in his little hatchback over from his folks' place. For a moment, I felt a small pang of hesitation as a flicker of memory surfaced. Then I pushed it away and said I would absolutely help him. We met at my apartment, and together we climbed into my International Scout, driving over to his parents and loading the flat screen TV, mattress, and other large boxes into the back. Then we drove back across town and into the neighborhood. I turned on Wasson from Michigan, driving down streets I hadn't been on in a year. I forced myself to appear calm, as Mark knew nothing about what had happened to me. When we reached the intersection with Pacific, I felt a small shiver shoot up my spine, and for a moment couldn't bring myself to look over across the street. Then I forced myself to. The bush sat there, looking slightly eerie, but nevertheless very inanimate in the fading light. I reached down and flicked on my headlights, banishing away the gloom and showing poignantly that it was, in fact, nothing but shrubbery. Get a hold of yourself, man. None of that even happened, anyways. Realizing that Mark was staring at me, I eased onto the accelerator and drove across that intersection. I spared a last look at the bush as we passed. It still looked normal. I let out a snort, shaking my head. Told ya. As we began to draw near his house and slow down, I suddenly saw him turn around in his seat and look out the back glass. "What is it, bro?" I asked him. For a moment, he simply continued to look, and then turned back to me. "You know anybody on the street besides me, man?" A small wave of confusion washed over me, and I shook my head as I parked in front of his place. "No, not that I'm aware of anyways." "Why?" He turned and pointed back through the back glass. "Apparently somebody does. Look, That was when an almost forgotten but horrifyingly familiar chill shot up my spine. I felt the blood drain from my face and my heart begin to pound in my chest as I twisted around in my seat to look behind us. There, back up the hill near the intersection, stood a figure bathed in the yellow glow of the streetlight which had snapped on overhead, one whose upper face was obscured by a hood pulled down low over its head. I felt myself begin to violently shake as the figure raised one arm to wave at us, twiddling the fingers like a human would at an animal. A flash of white caught the streetlight's glow, coming from the exposed lower half of its face, as it grinned. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.